What would you do if someone refused to serve your own mother, without knowing that you owned the very restaurant she was in? In today's powerful story, a simple act of discrimination turns into a life-changing lesson in humility and respect. Watch as a waiter's shocking behavior is turned upside down when the truth of who he's really serving is revealed. Stay with us as we take you through this heartfelt, eye-opening experience that'll remind us all of the value of kindness and the power of second chances. If you enjoy stories that inspire and make you think, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on more real-life stories with deep, human connections. Thanks for watching, and let's dive right in. It was an unassuming Tuesday afternoon at La Belle Maison, an upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown. The restaurant was known for its excellent cuisine, chic decor, and most importantly, impeccable service. It was the pride and joy of its owner, Thomas Green, a successful African-American businessman who had spent years cultivating an atmosphere of elegance and respect at his establishment. But for Thomas, La Belle Maison was more than just a business. It was a symbol of his hard-earned success and his family's legacy. Thomas's mother, Miss Evelyn Green, was the matriarch of the family. At 78 years old, she moved with the grace and dignity of someone who had weathered life's storms but remained standing strong. She was the heart of Thomas's success, the one who had nurtured him through their toughest times growing up in a segregated neighborhood. Evelyn always believed in the value of respect, no matter a person's status or appearance, a lesson she instilled deeply in her son. Despite her age, Evelyn was fiercely independent. She lived alone, refused to hire help, and was often seen walking around the neighborhood with her cane, greeting everyone with a warm smile. That Tuesday, however, she had decided to treat herself to lunch at her son's restaurant. She hadn't told him she was coming. She liked surprises, and she knew Thomas would be thrilled to see her. But the day had other plans. As she stepped through the restaurant's large glass doors, the smell of freshly baked bread and roasted garlic filled the air. The dining room was spacious and light-filled, with patrons scattered across tables adorned with white tablecloths and fine china. Evelyn smiled, proud of what her son had accomplished. She shuffled towards the hostess stand, where a young, polished-looking hostess greeted her. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the hostess said, her smile tight but polite. "Do you have a reservation?" "No, dear. But I was hoping you might have a table for one," Evelyn responded kindly. The hostess hesitated, eyeing Evelyn up and down. Her clothes, though clean and neat, were modest and did not match the usual attire of La Belle Maison's clientele. There was a brief pause before she responded. "We're quite busy today. I'll have to see if we have any availability." Evelyn nodded, taking no offense. She understood that appearances mattered in places like this. It was a lesson she had learned a long time ago. But beneath her patient demeanor, she couldn't help but feel a little out of place. After all, it had been a while since she had dined at her son's restaurant. After a few minutes, a young waiter approached her. His name tag read Kyle. He was tall, with sandy blonde hair and an air of impatience. "We're full right now, but you can wait if you want," Kyle said flatly, not offering her a seat. "It might be a while." Evelyn, always gracious, smiled. "That's fine. I'll wait." Kyle glanced around the restaurant, visibly irritated. He seemed unsure of what to do next, but eventually walked away, leaving Evelyn standing awkwardly near the entrance. As minutes passed, Evelyn noticed several other patrons being seated immediately, despite their arrival after hers. She couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with her age, or perhaps her appearance. Finally, Kyle returned, his tone slightly condescending. "Okay, we have a table now. Follow me." Evelyn slowly followed him to a small table in the corner, far from the other diners. It was near the kitchen door, where the clatter of pots and pans filled the air. "Here you go," Kyle said, handing her a menu without making eye contact. "Your server will be with you soon." And with that, he walked away, not bothering to offer her a drink or even a glass of water. Evelyn sat quietly, trying not to let the treatment bother her. She had lived through much worse in her life, but there was something about this experience that stung. Perhaps it was the realization that, even in this modern world, people still judged others by their appearance, Or perhaps it was just that she hadn't expected this in her own son's restaurant. Time ticked on, and no server came to take her order. Kyle passed by her table several times, but each time he ignored her, choosing instead to dote on other patrons, most of whom were younger, wealthier-looking customers. Evelyn watched as he brought out drinks, took orders, and smiled charmingly at them, all the while leaving her unattended. After about 20 minutes, Evelyn finally caught Kyle's attention as he walked past her once again. She raised her hand gently. "Excuse me, young man," she said softly. "Could I place my order now?" Kyle sighed heavily, clearly irritated, and approached her table with a forced smile. "Yeah, sure. What do you want?" Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes soft but firm. "I'll have the grilled salmon with a side of steamed vegetables, please." Kyle jotted down the order hastily, barely looking at her. "Anything else?" he asked, his tone clipped. "No, thank you," Evelyn said quietly. Without another word, Kyle walked away. Evelyn sat back, trying to shake off the feeling of being treated like an inconvenience. It wasn't the first time she had experienced this kind of behavior, but it still hurt, especially in a place she had hoped would feel like home. As she waited for her meal, she couldn't help but reflect on how far society had come and yet how much further it still had to go. Her thoughts drifted back to her son, Thomas, and how proud she was of him. She knew he would never tolerate this kind of treatment from his staff, but she also didn't want to cause a scene. She was old-fashioned that way. She believed in handling things with grace. Meanwhile, in the back office, Thomas was busy going over the day's reports. He had been at the restaurant all morning, but hadn't had a chance to make it out to the dining room yet. His mind was focused on the upcoming expansion of La Belle Maison. Business had been booming, and he was in the process of scouting locations for a second restaurant. But then, something tugged at him, a feeling, an intuition. He decided to take a break and check on the floor. As he stepped into the dining room, he immediately noticed something was off. The usually warm, welcoming atmosphere felt tense. He scanned the room and, to his surprise, saw his mother sitting alone at a small table in the corner. His heart dropped. What was she doing here? And why was she sitting by the kitchen? Thomas's eyes narrowed as he saw Kyle walk past her table without even glancing in her direction. He could tell from his mother's expression that something wasn't right. He strode across the room, his long legs covering the distance quickly. "Mom?" he said, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. Evelyn looked up, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Thomas, I didn't expect to see you. What are you doing here sitting all the way in the corner?" Thomas asked, his tone soft but edged with frustration as he glanced around for a waiter. "Oh, I just decided to stop by for lunch," Evelyn replied, her voice calm as always. "I didn't want to bother you." Thomas frowned, his gaze shifting from his mother to Kyle, who was now standing at the bar, chatting with another server. He clenched his jaw, anger bubbling up inside him. "I'll be right back, Mom," he said, his voice tight. Thomas walked straight toward Kyle, his footsteps deliberate and heavy. Kyle didn't notice him at first, too busy laughing at something the other server said. But when he finally looked up and saw Thomas approaching, his smile faded. "Hey, Kyle," Thomas said, his tone cold but controlled. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Kyle nodded, suddenly nervous. He had never seen Thomas like this before. Thomas led him to a quieter corner of the restaurant, away from the other diners. He crossed his arms and stared at the young waiter, his eyes hard. "Do you know who that woman is?" Thomas asked, his voice low but intense. Kyle glanced back at Evelyn, still sitting patiently at her table. "No, I mean, she's just a customer, right?" Thomas shook his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. "That's my mother." Kyle's face drained of color. I didn't know." Thomas didn't give him a chance to finish. "And even if she wasn't my mother, is that how you treat any customer? By ignoring them, giving them a bad table, and making them feel like they don't belong here?" Kyle stammered. I didn't mean to." "Save it." Thomas cut him off. "I've watched you all afternoon. You've been giving special attention to the younger, wealthier-looking customers while neglecting the people who don't fit your image of who belongs here. That's not how we do things at La Belle Maison." Kyle swallowed hard, the reality of his actions sinking in. He hadn't realized how badly he had treated her until now. Thomas leaned in closer, his voice a whisper but sharp. Let me make something very clear to you, Kyle. Every person who walks through that door deserves the same respect and care, no matter how they look, how old they are, or how much money they have. Do you understand me? Kyle nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment. Yes, sir. I'm really sorry. I didn't realize. Thomas straightened up, his expression softening slightly. You will go over there, apologize to her, and make it right. And after this, I want you to think about how you treat people, not just here but everywhere. Kyle nodded again, swallowing the lump in his throat. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about his job. It was about something deeper, a lesson in humility that he hadn't expected to learn today. As Thomas watched Kyle walk back toward his mother's table, he took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger that still simmered inside him. He had worked too hard to build this place on principles of respect and dignity, and seeing his own mother treated that way cut deeper than anything. Kyle approached Evelyn's table cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the eyes of other staff and diners on him, watching, waiting to see how he would handle the situation. He had never felt so small. Evelyn looked up as Kyle stopped in front of her, her kind eyes meeting his. There was no anger in her gaze, no malice, just a quiet, patient understanding that made him feel even worse. Ma'am, Kyle began, his voice shaking slightly. I want to sincerely apologize for how I treated you earlier. I was wrong, and there's no excuse for it. I hope you can forgive me. Evelyn studied him for a moment, her face calm and serene. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the regret that weighed heavily on him. She had seen that look before, many times, in many faces. Life had a way of humbling people, sometimes more harshly than others. There's no need to apologize, young man, she said gently, her voice soft and warm. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you've learned something from it. Kyle blinked, taken aback by her kindness. He had expected anger, or at least a cold dismissal. But Evelyn's grace and forgiveness were unexpected, and they cut deeper than any harsh words could have. I have learned, Kyle said quietly. I'll do better. I promise. Evelyn smiled at him, her face lighting up with a warmth that felt like a ray of sunshine. That's all anyone can ask for. Kyle nodded gratefully, and then hurried off to the kitchen to make sure her meal was prepared perfectly. He didn't want to make another mistake today. As Kyle disappeared into the kitchen, Thomas returned to his mother's table, his expression softening as he approached her. I'm so sorry, Mom, Thomas said, sitting down across from her. I had no idea this was happening. Evelyn smiled, shaking her head. There's no need to apologize, Thomas. These things happen. It's a lesson, that's all. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. I just hate that you were treated like that here, of all places. I built this restaurant to be a place where everyone feels welcome. And you've done a wonderful job, son, Evelyn said, her voice full of pride. But you can't control everything. What's important is that you handled it, and that young man learned something today. Thomas looked at his mother, admiration swelling in his chest. She had always been like this, gracious, wise, and unfailingly kind, even in the face of disrespect. He had learned so much from her over the years, not just about how to run a business, but about how to live a life of integrity. Later that evening, after the dinner rush had died down and the restaurant was preparing to close, Thomas stood at the front door, watching the last few patrons leave. The day had been eventful, to say the least, but it had also been a reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. As he locked the door and turned off the lights, he found himself thinking about Kyle. The young man had worked hard for the rest of his shift, noticeably more attentive to all the customers, not just the ones who appeared wealthy or important. Thomas had seen the change in him, a shift in attitude, a newfound awareness. He hoped the lesson would stick. Back in the office, Thomas found himself scrolling through old photos on his desk, pictures of his mother, his siblings, and even one of himself as a young boy. The photo that caught his attention most was a faded black and white image of Evelyn standing in front of a small diner she used to work at when Thomas was a child. She had been a waitress, working long hours to support their family, often dealing with rude customers who didn't see her worth. Yet, she had never complained, always reminding Thomas that dignity and respect were things you carried within yourself, no matter how others treated you. That memory made Thomas pause. His mother had once been in Kyle's shoes, and yet she had never let the world's judgment define her. She had worked her way up from that diner to help him build his dream. "You've always been too good to people, Mom," Thomas said with a chuckle, shaking his head. Evelyn smiled, her eyes twinkling. "There's no such thing as being too good to people. That's what this world needs more of. Kindness, grace, and understanding." Thomas leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. His mother was right, as she always was. He had built his restaurant on the values she had instilled in him, but he knew he had to stay vigilant to ensure those values were upheld by everyone who worked there. As they sat together, their conversation shifted to lighter topics: family, old memories, and Thomas's plans for the restaurant's expansion. Evelyn's meal arrived shortly after, beautifully prepared and presented. Kyle had clearly made sure it was perfect. "Everything looks wonderful," Evelyn said as she began to eat, her face lighting up with delight at the taste of the grilled salmon. Thomas smiled, watching her enjoy her meal. For a moment, all was right in the world. The next day, Thomas arrived early at the restaurant. He walked through the dining room, straightening chairs and checking details, just as he did every morning. He wanted everything to be perfect, not just for his customers, but because he felt a sense of responsibility to uphold the values his mother had taught him. As he made his way to the kitchen, he noticed Kyle standing by the counter, nervously adjusting his apron. The young man looked up when he saw Thomas, his expression uncertain. "Morning, Kyle," Thomas greeted him, his voice calm but firm. "Morning, Mr. Green," Kyle replied, clearly unsure if everything was truly forgiven. Thomas stood next to him for a moment, watching the kitchen staff prepare for the day ahead. "You did good yesterday," Thomas finally said. "I saw how you changed the way you were handling things." Kyle nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, sir. I really appreciate the chance to make it right." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder, offering a small smile. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Just remember, every customer who walks in here deserves the best service we can give them, no matter who they are." Kyle nodded, his expression serious. "I won't forget that, sir." With that, Thomas walked away, feeling a sense of peace. The restaurant was not just a business. It was a place where people could learn, grow, and be treated with dignity. And in that, it was a reflection of everything his mother had taught him. As the morning sun filtered through the large windows of La Belle Maison, Thomas knew that the heart of his restaurant wasn't just in the food or the service. It was in the way people treated each other, with respect, grace, and humility. And that was a legacy worth preserving.